Hello and welcome to this tutorial. In this tutorial I want to show you the new features that are provided by Cinema4D version 21 as well as After Effects 2020. As you can see, I am in After Effects, and if I look at the After Effects About box, it will show me that this is version 17.0.2, which means this is Adobe After Effects 2020. As you can see, I have a Cinema4D file already in my project window, and I want to open the Cinema4D application bundled with this After Effects. So to do that, I'm going to go into the Edit menu and select Edit Original. This will open Cinema4D Lite version 21, and the Quick Start dialog box shows up, and I'm going to close it. The file that I created is an empty file, and the interface looks very familiar, but there are some differences. The interface are a little lighter, and the tools are grouped in a little bit of a different way, especially the ones that are here in the objects. The Spline especially, they show new spline tools that are handmade splines. I'm going to be showing you a little bit about those as well. And the blue splines continue to be the same parametric splines. Other categories in here have been rearranged and subdivided according to what they are related to. And the new addition is the fields that also have been introduced in the full application, and this is very useful. Hopefully in a future tutorial I will talk about how to use these elements. The first feature that I want to talk about is the Extrude object. The Extrude object, if you're familiar with it, we saw it previously in another tutorial, is that you can actually create geometry by using a spline. So for this particular purpose, I'm going to use a text spline that I can find here in my spline menu. I'm going to select a font that is very heavy and probably has a serif for better representation of the feature. I'm going to go ahead and select the Ultra typeface in here, align the text in the middle, and maybe change this to a different text. I will place the text inside of the Extrude object as a child, therefore we're going to get some extrusion and the geometry to render. I will increase the Z-axis extrusion to probably 50, so it's a big, thick text. As you can see, this text by default doesn't have any bevels or anything like that, so I'm gonna go and into the Caps tab of the Extrude object, and as you can see, the interface in here is a little bit different, and the thing that I want to do is, first of all, select the separate bevel controls. What that is that it's going to separate the start bevel, which is the one in the front, and the end bevel, which is the one in the back, to be completely manipulated individually. The start bevel, which is the front, already has the default value of round, but you can select other types of bevel shapes. If I increase the size of that bevel, notice that I can go and go and go and continue, and it will stop creating the bevel on the interface, but my slider can continue up to whatever number I want. The reason why this one is stopping at particular number, like in this case is about 36, is because at the bottom of the parameters of this Extrude object we have something very important, which is called avoid self-intersections. This is the magic tool that allows the text to always extrude in a very clean way. If you're familiar with Cinema4D Lite, the previous versions, you probably remember that extruding text was a little problematic, especially when the text used to have serif little tails. So if I disable this, you are going to see a very familiar artifact happening on the number 4 and the letter C over there. So this, by disabling the avoid self-intersections, is behaving like the previous versions, where you had to carefully manipulate the size of your bevel until you get something that looked very clean. This probably was the best you could do in the previous versions. But now with this button, you can actually go larger and make the bevel the way that you want it. Right now I have the bevel shape to be round, but I can lower the segments to 1, so it's kind of like a very sharp, almost chiseled bevel in some areas, as you can see there. This is very attractive, and to create something like this with the previous version was virtually impossible. Besides that, you can have also the extended shape in here, that by moving this value you can extend the front face forward or even into the actual typeface, making the bevel even more interesting. I'm going to go ahead and set that back to the default of 0, and I'm going to show you that also the bevel shape has different other elements. But before I do that, let me show you that there is a load preset and save preset buttons over here, meaning that there are already preset bevels that you can actually use and then tweak at your convenience. Let's go ahead and load a preset. I'm going to load the 4 steps over here, and you will notice that now my bevel changed to those steps that I see here. If you compare with the actual shape that shows up in this curve, you will see that there is a relation of every single one of those elements. I can go ahead and select several of these points in the curve graph and delete them. That means that I can actually modify this bevel according to what I want. So you can customize and create the bevel that you want by using the curve as shown in here. I can go ahead and increase the size of this bevel, so the text is going to look very interesting and steppy in the front, which is fine. And I'm going to leave the front face right there. For the back bevel, I'm going to add just a simple chisel bevel by increasing down below here where it says end bevel, the size to be about 5 or 6. And I'm going to make the segments to be just 1. Now, by having the extrude object doing this, now we have created a very interesting object that can be used in motion graphics. And all of these parameters can be animated, meaning that your text can change appearance over time. If you remember from the previous version, applying materials to text was a little cryptic without remembering the letter codes. Now it's much easier, and let me show you where that is. Right here in the extrude object, we have a selections tab that tells us what the codes we need for the polygon selections. As you can see, the shell, the letter is S, and the start cap is C1, and so forth. Also, if you want to just select a few of them, like for example the start cap right here, you can enable that, and then when I click that, the selection actually comes out and becomes available. I can also do the shell, which is the interior of the text, and apply it, and right there it becomes available as well. I can also do the start bevel, which is the bevel in the front, and enable that, and now I have a selection. By having those selection tags in front of the extrude object, now I can easily apply that material to each one of those parts. So let me just create 3 materials in here by double clicking on an empty area in the material manager. And when I select one of them, I'm going to make the front to be a nice orange color. And I'm going to rename that by double clicking on its name to be the front face. The next one is going to be a very light yellow, and that is going to be my bevel, so I'm going to type in bevel in there. And the next one, I'm going to call it the shell, which is the interior of the letters, and that shell is going to be a nice dark blue, something like this. I'm going to apply all those 3 materials at the same time to my text, so I can drag it and put it either on top of the letters, or I can drag it on the object manager and drop it on top of the extrude object, and they will show up in the object manager just like this. The first one, which is the orange one, that is for the front face, so I want to make sure that I take the selection tag that is for the front face. If I don't remember the coding or the naming, I can go back to the extrude and I can see that the start cap is C1. So I can select the material and drag the C1 selection tag into the selection parameter under the tag tab. I will do exactly the same thing for the bevel. So the bevel, actually, if I look back at the selections, the bevel is R1. So I'm going to go ahead and select the R1, which is this one, and drag it into the selection. And on the last one, I'm going to do something different. If I look at the selection, that is going to be the shell. Notice that the shell, the shortcut letter is the capital letter S. So instead of dragging the actual S selection into the parameter, I'm going to go ahead and type it in. So if I type it in and I press enter, now I have everything created the way that I want it. So at this point, I can see that my number 4 doesn't have a front face in here, so I can modify the caps in here and maybe reduce the size so I can see a little bit of that front face color in the number 4. Okay, I'm going to create the extended shape and maybe move it forward so it looks a little more pronounced, like so. Perfect. For the back tab, we didn't do anything, but you could do exactly the same thing as what we did for the front. Let me just quickly do that for you. So I'm going to go ahead and select the bevel once again and apply it over here. So if you remember on the selections, the end bevel is R2. So instead of enabling here the button, I'm going to type in R2 in the material under the selection. I'm going to type in R2, and that should go into the bevel. If I look at the extrude selections, the end cap is C2, so I'm going to use the yellow color, apply it to the extrude, and type in here in the selection the capital letter C and the number 2, so I am applying that material into the back cap as well. So as you can see, now I have created those two different types of bevel, one for the front and one for the back, and I have applied the materials for both of those sides and the different elements. Now the next feature that I want to show you is spline tools that are now giving you the capability of creating really complex shapes in a very easy way. So I'm going to go ahead and select the spline pen right now and look at it from the top, because I want to create sort of a shape that is going to be unique to this design. So I'm going to make this handmade, so I can actually click and click and click and click and just click. If you want to create a spline that contains the handles to control the curve, you can click and drag when you apply the actual click on your spline. Okay. So by doing that, I went to the first point and I closed the entire spline, but then I have this area that is curved and this other area that is kind of like a linear shape. If I go ahead into one of those vertices and I double click, notice that it becomes a curved point. I can do that exactly the same to the first point over here and modify the handles if I want to. I can move those points or select a point and modify the handle as well. I'm going to do exactly the same to the other points that were linear. So now I created a round shape. I can go ahead and modify this shape as I wish. My tool continues to be the same, so I am not changing tools. This tool is very versatile, so I can actually use this tool anywhere that I want. So I can convert certain points as linear, or double click again and convert them back to a smooth curve. If I want to add a point, I can press my Control key and go in the middle of a segment and click, and now I have added a new point. If I want to get rid of a point, I can press my Control key, move my mouse into the point that I want to remove, and notice that I get kind of like a ghost image of how my curve is going to look like when I get really close to it. So when I get close to it, I click, and then I have the curve that is in there. If I want to modify that curve, I can go and grab that curve, that segment, so both of those points get updated. So this is the shape that I want to use. I want to go back to my perspective view, and you'll notice that I drew that underneath the C4D letters that I have there. I'm going to go ahead and add another extrude object, and that object I'm going to use to be the parent of the spline that I just drew. So I'm going to drag the spline, and I'm going to put it under the extrude. The extrude object is creating the extrusion in the z-axis by default, so I'm going to type in 0 under the movement in the object tab of the extrude object, and I'm going to increase, or actually in the negative, I'm going to make it -50, so it's going to be extruding downwards, like so. By doing that, now I'm going to apply a bevel, so I'm going to use a preset. I'm going to do separate bevel controls because I want to only extrude or only apply a bevel on the top area of this shape. So if I start doing this, notice that I am actually doing that precisely to that area. But I want to use a preset. So I'm going to go ahead and load a preset, and I'm going to use the shifted bevel over here. I want to increase the size of that shifted bevel. And now, because I did that, I can take that extrude object and with my move tool and make sure that I am in the model mode, I'm going to move that using the y-axis to a point that doesn't interfere with the C4D text letters in there. I'm going to apply a material, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new material by double-clicking on an empty area in my material manager, and that I'm going to create kind of like a dark gray color, and I'm going to call it plate. I drag that into my object and I just leave it that way. So now I have my plate, which I think is extruded a little too much, so I'm going to select the extrude object and reduce the extrusion under the object tab to probably -20, so it's not so much. I can always go back to the caps and remove or reduce the size of that bevel, which I think is a little too big, and also again modify the position in the y-axis of that element. So now I have my complete setup. Okay, the only thing that I need is an infinite floor, so I'm going to go ahead into my elements over here, select the floor, and of course I'm going to move it down so I can see the plate right there. And I'm going to apply the same material to the floor that I applied to the plate. Alright, so now I have my setup that I can preview by clicking on this button and render a preview of that. I'm going to quickly add a infinite light, so I'm going to go and select into my lights, select an infinite light. I'm going to move it up and make sure that I use my rotation tool and use the red axis to point downwards, and then use my green axis to point to the left, to the right, I'm sorry. And by selecting the light in the object manager, I get the actual attributes down below here. In the shadow, under the general tab, I'm going to select area, and I'm going to go into the details tab, and in the infinite angle I'm going to select a 7, and what that does, it creates a soft area shadow that is pointing from the left to the right. I'm going to save this project, so I go to File and Save Project, and now I can jump into After Effects, and I'm going to create a composition based on this particular Cinema4D file. Once I do that, notice that my Cineware plugin comes up, and I can enable the renderer to be standard final so I can see the entire scene the same exact way as I was looking at it in Cinema 4D. I'm going to go back to the Cinema 4D Lite, and at this moment I want to talk about another special feature that is very useful for any motion graphic designer, especially if you're working on television, probably creating promos or titles or things that need a lot of changes all the time. Instead of using templates or anything like that, you can actually use something that is included in Cinema 4D Lite called the Takes. Takes is a window that is on the right side next to the Objects Manager. If you look at it the right side of that window, you will notice that there is Objects, Takes, and Content Browser. I'm going to click on Takes, and I'm going to grab this window from these lines, drag it, and put it in between the Attribute Manager and the Object Manager. So now this window is the Takes. Just imagine like the take is like different possibilities that you can have in your design. So right now we are in the main design, and I want to make some changes to this design, but I want to keep the original changes as well. That's where Takes actually comes in handy. So to create a new take, I go ahead and click on this button, New Take. So I create a new take. I'm going to call this AE because I'm going to change the text from C4D to the words AE. So in order for me to edit this particular element, I need to enable this other button called Auto Take. So I click in there, and now I go to the object that I want to change, which is the text object. You will notice that right here in the Attributes Manager, all of the parameters became with a color blue. That means they are now ready to be edited and be able to be included in the new take. So whatever changes I make from now on these blue parameters, they're going to belong to the new take that I just created. So the first change that I want to do is the text. Instead of C4D, I'm going to type in AE. The other change that I want to make is that I want to change the color of the floor and the color of the plate that I created. So to do that, I'm going to use the yellow color. So I'm going to take the yellow color and drag it on top of the Extrude material tag and let go. I will do exactly the same, and I will drag that on top of the floor material tag. And now all my ground looks yellow. I'm going to save this project, and of course I'm going to disable my auto take and go back to the main take. So going back and forth from these takes, you can see the difference between one and the other. So all these changes, all these variations are saved in my project. I'm going to go back to After Effects, and you can see that nothing seems to have changed, except that when I select my Cinema 4D project right here in the timeline, now the Cineware plugin will give me the option to click on a Set Take button. If I click there, I can see that I have a drop-down menu with two takes. One is called Main, which is the actual take that we're looking at, and AE, which is the new take that I created. So I select that and I say OK, and then the new render is going to show me the changes that I made in the take system in Cinema 4D. As you can see, this might be very useful when you want to change not only materials but also shapes, or in this case text, different messages for different types of promos and different types of looks. The take system is one of those systems that is very, very useful, especially when you are in a creative mode creating different variations. Other features that I haven't talked about are the fields that you can see here. These are very nice elements that have been introduced in the Cinema 4D full application, and some of them made it into the Cinema 4D Lite. Hopefully in the next few tutorials that I'm going to be doing, we'll be talking about some of these different fields. So until next time, I hope you like this video. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.